Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome cordially. This is the next of numerous debates and panel discussions held within the Freedom Game scope. It seems to be abstract, but as a matter of fact, it delves into the most burning questions of reality. And what is the reaction of social sciences to Anthropocene? We've got 4 excellent guests and only 58 minutes for this discussion. And we are all using our own language. 4 people from Poland speaking Polish, Professor Keane in English. So you might get hold of the appliances that transmit live interpretation. This is a fresh notion, but it was popular in the recent 20 years. There are controversies who used it. Paul Crassen, probably a chemist from the Netherlands, to speak to the geological clocks unit where human species has impacted geological development of the Earth. And conclusions are as follows. In brief, we live in post-Holocene period where human impact is the most important one that impacts the atmosphere and geosphere, which means that the borderline between nature and human has been blurred and is of no greater sense. It's a paradox. In Anthropocene, we cannot be anthropocentric. In this era, we cannot think about our own fate only, but also about the fate of other species, because their persistence on Earth is inseparable from our conditions of life. And we need to think about this world in systemic categories, dependencies of the world, and dependencies between human and nature. We are going to discuss this epoch and the relation to social scientists. We have representatives of different branches of sciences, a philosopher, political sciences representative, sociology representative. Therefore, question goes to our Australian guest, Professor John Keane. Well, this question will go to other participants, but Professor is the first to answer. Anthropocene. Is this the right notion, the right name to describe today's condition of the world, today's standing of the world? Jensen Moore, Donna Haraway, and other authors say that Anthropocene suggests that people have rebuilt, have reshaped the world. But we need to ask, which people? Or white, rich males from highly developed countries, probably? Inhabitants of southern countries? They could feel the results of their changes without actually being the agents in it. So Anthropocene, capitalism, centrism, or any other notion, which one would give a good description of the situation we're in at the moment?
Dziękuję bardzo, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is a period in which there is what the French, great French sociologists called a period of classification struggles. I mean, there is an effort to find terms and a language to grasp, to make sense of, to name, politically to act upon the destruction, the accelerating destruction of the biosphere in which we dwell. And there are competitor names. You mentioned Donna Haraway. She speaks about Thulacene. This is quite a tough word even to pronounce in any language. Some insist that this has everything to do with capitalism, Capitalocene. Bruno Latour, who sadly passed away just less than 1 week ago, was sure that terrestrial, the concept of us as terrestrials, among other terrestrials, is a better way of speaking. Anthropocene is one of these words. In my view, already you can tell that I think it's one word among others. This is, in my opinion, a period in which there should be 100 flowers, 1,000 flowers that bloom, in which there is these classification struggles continue. One last point to make about Anthropocene, we have not much time, is that it is not for me an adequate term, and it cannot be the master signifier, you know, the big word that captures everything. Why? It has anthropocentric connotations. There is a kind of species narcissism in this word, the belief that the Holocene is ended, that began 10,000 years ago, and now we have a new geological era. There is also the problem of present-mindedness. You know, there is a kind of arrogance in the word. How do we know that we are now the principal drivers of a new geological era when we are only at the beginning of it? This is unclear. And then lastly, you already mentioned it, Michał. To speak of Anthropocene, you know, it suggests that all humans are equally responsible for driving this destruction. In fact, it depends how you look at the statistics, but no more than 1/5 of the world's population in matters of consumption and extraction of resources, species extinction, no more than 1/5 of the world's population is actually driving this process. So I have an open mind about this. I think, if I may say one last thing, the good thing about the Anthropocene, the discussion of the Anthropocene, is that it forces us to see that so many of the familiar words in our vocabulary need to be rethought. I give you one example. Democracy. I spent most of my life writing about the past and broadcasting and talking about the past, present, and future of democracy. It is, if you think about it, the most anthropocentric political ideal known to humanity. What could be more anthropocentric than the principle that the people are the sovereign power and can decide on our planet how power should be distributed, how it should be processed, how it should be handled. Democracy has to change. And that's what some of my work now is about. How to transform the meaning of democracy so that it is no longer, you know, an anthropocene. And it's thanks to the big discussion since 2000, in the last 2 decades, thanks to the discussion of the Anthropocene, that we're forced to rethink keywords: society versus nature, human rights, democracy. These are all candidates for redefinition. Dziękuję.
Dziękuję. Do tego
Thank you very much indeed, Professor. We shall be returning to this theme: who should be represented in democracy, and is this still democracy? We shall be returning to it in the second round. Now, Professor Radosław Markowski. So I'm going to introduce some streamlining observations. Anthropocene, the term described by life sciences, is not what we deal in social sciences, like it or not. This is what they said this year or next year the International Geological Association will say that this map, this timeline, marks the beginning of Anthropocene and the end of Holocene. And man has become a geological factor. They have proven it in the forest, in different layers and strata, in rock body. And we have Anthropocene challenges and social sciences response. 3 years ago, I said it's a wonderful period while speaking at the international conference for us, the social sciences. Many years ago, those natural sciences people were looking down on us, saying you don't have any rights. And they say this is the human era, these geologians, chemists, physicians, and now we philosophers, sociologists, political scientists, help these from tough sciences to understand what this beast is all about. We are the upper hand, and this great acceleration is the notion. It started in 1950s. This is what we agreed. What is apparent is that 8 billion people, this demographical acceleration has nothing to do with consumption increase of the people who live on our planet. There is a very nice graphic representation that we don't have time to show. There is the growth of people, but there is exponential growth of different consumption parameters of Homo sapiens. Bruno Latour, he wrote many wonderful things. He had two notions that he offered. Critical zones concept. He said that we people do not realize that we can live anywhere from the level of the sea up to 5 kilometers up there. Otherwise, we would have to have rockets and oxygen bottles, and there is no life away from this critical zone. And the other notion he coined, humanity should re-land on this planet, look around, seeing what they've done, and redefine what is worth doing and what is not worth doing. In this reaction of social sciences that I'll try to speak about from the point of view of economy and political sciences, the perspective is as follows. Social sciences have to rethink the paradigms. Who is man? And try to think it in the sense of modernization of reality and side effects that we have not expected. Madam Professor, is this adequate a notion to describe the position we are in? Ladies and gentlemen, philosophy has been developing calmly and peacefully, just like ethics. And I was listening to the four speakers and I thought to myself, a philosopher sees this as a continuum, quite a peaceful one. The idea that we are the center has always been with us. You remember Greek philosophy, that man is the measure of the universe and everything around it. But there have been huge changes Professor Markowski was referring to. Philosophy and ethics are wondering how to respond to this. And these responses will focus on global problems, like the role of man, how nature is treated, whether other animals apart from human beings are the moral subjects. Is a river or a tree or a mountain a legal person? Can they be legal persons? So these are the problems that appear alongside technological development. We have always placed ourselves in the center, no doubts about it, but never before have we had mechanisms, technology, possibilities to destroy not only the environment we live in, the closest to us, but to destroy the whole house, our home, the planet. Speaking about the notions, terminology, there is not much value added. This is more about moral questions that are of the greatest interest, that need solving. Notions, we can use old notions to describe what is happening. Szymon Bujalski? Ever since we started to exert a great impact on the planet, we destroyed half of coral reefs, rainforests, arable lands, are mainly used for agriculture, 3/4 for meat and dairy products, 80% 80% of depletion of other species. So there is an extensive list of destruction that is human-made. So we are the factor that changes the earth, and it changes it very quickly. If we squeeze in 4.5 billion years into a calendar year, 150 years ago, we started the Industrial Revolution. So in these terms, it's just a second away from here. And it has taken us a second to have this kind of huge impact on how the Earth operates, how much we've changed the climate, and so on and so forth. So it is justified to speak about Anthropocene. Professor Keane was saying that it might be slightly arrogant to believe that people have this impact, that we are the center of the world. I think that pretending that it is not so, that there is no impact of humans, it is turning the blind eye on the problem. We need to face the problem in order to find solutions to coin a better tomorrow. How much we've destroyed today, and how much we'll destroy tomorrow. I've given you some examples. You may find it interesting to know that climate change pace has been the greatest ever since an asteroid hit the Earth and did away with dinosaurs. If this is not a factor, so if we are the second worst thing that has ever happened to the Earth over millions of years, we come second in the ranking after the asteroids. So it needs to have a name, a proper name, and the name is Anthropocene. And we can discuss it later on in the course of our discussion. Anthropocene is a consequence, kind of, and capital, that the centric attitude is the center, is the key, is the source of the problems that we have introduced into the world. So let me ask you, I know what is the argument when people say that this is the capital, and Soviet Union has been transforming the climate, was transforming the climate. All right, I've never heard this kind of argument, not to this scale, and we need to look at the millions of tons of CO2, gigatons that we emit. What's the purpose? What's the reason for that? So that a handful of people have more and more, and it comes at the cost of billions of other people. Again, I'm a journalist, and my focus is the climate change. So we've got the most data with regards to this change. So 1% of the richest people in the world are responsible for twice as much of emissions as the rest of the world, the poorest. So if you want to hear facts and figures, few dozens of millions of people who have greater impact than other billions of people. Therefore, well, it's associated with your earnings and what is your objective in life, what are your aspirations, and what you earn the money for, what you want to do with the money you earn. So there is this theme that poorer people suffer, although they are not responsible. True, but there is a more profound question that you need to ask. What do the poor people want to attain? If they follow the Western countries, they chase for money, to chase to get better cars, to fly planes. Consumption, it's not the question that they would like to live a different life, a peaceful life. They cannot spoil the earth as we do because they have less money. So what are our objectives and aspirations in life? What is important for us is the key in comprehension of this.
I'll interrupt you, not because you are too radical or contrary to the ideology at these freedom games, but how to get out of this situation. Some premises for hope for the future would be asked at the end. Now I need to ask you about the plot regarding who caused such deep changes. People, which people, and then practical and political part. If the world we live in which the human civilization operates is enormously complex by different feedbacks, is involved in its environment, if relations to other entities around, non-human actors, as we heard, if all that dominates about the controlling of the system, if it can sustain itself, and at the same dependencies are very complex, the question arises in the political sphere, if we want to run this or other policies. For hundreds of years, thinkers and scientists have been disputing who should decide about matters within the human community. There is even further complications, that is, non-human actors. And this is a philosophical and political studies question. Who, by whom, who should be represented by whom in this complex world? Who should speak on behalf of a river on whose depth and stream our life depends? Not fish depend, but we also may depend. Do we have any seeds of ideas how the problem of representing those who do not vote, those who do not speak, at least in the language comprehensible to us, how to solve this problem? Thank you. Let me answer the question. Just need to add that a thought comes here. How did we miss the small development? You will find plethora of books from the 1960s and 70s. Milton's theory of deviation. Had I time, I would show you the capitalism plot there. But getting back to what is happening in this area of political ideas, I've launched a project, Suspended, which means Representing Silence 2.0. In political studies, we have long been dealing with silent minorities. We've been considering how to include them so that they have something to say in parliaments. As you duly noticed today, there is a problem how to represent our animal brothers, the 3% of wild animals that decide what the world looks like. There are different ideas. I addressed economists recently saying they need to consider the fact that economy might become a subdiscipline of ecology. If they prefer a soft version of what I wanted to say, economy certainly needs to be eco-sensitive. In the Anthropocene literature, there is a story that say that market capitalism is okay in decisions how to produce, where, how to transfer, but they are awful when calculating costs. They didn't calculate costs properly. That is why there is new subject in Western universities, Anthropocene accountability or Anthropocene governance. These subjects are lectured, and they assume that nature is not costless. It needs to be included in the accounts. What are political studies initiatives? Pretty courageous. Third chambers of parliaments where young people could veto what the elderly pass in the parliaments, disregarding the future in 50 years. Getting back to the Representing Silence to Zero project, I need to stress that it is a huge problem how to educate for professions that would be authorized, legitimized as professions that can speak on behalf of the rivers. Rivers have legal capacity in India and in New Zealand. And the huge problem involved is difficult to understand by Homo sapiens that it is not supposed to be how the river or forest serve people, but how, despite what we want, we should defend the forest, the river. To this end, we will need specialized professions of public trust that would be legitimized and represented in representative bodies and could veto irresponsible behavior of the human species who still want to produce 500 tons of aluminium were produced. It's as much as wrapping China and Gobi Desert with aluminium foil. The nature will not produce such things. Nature is weak at that. It's us who generate the waste. We do not know what to do with. So that is a true challenge. New subjects, new ideas. Much is happening in political studies, especially regarding the veto chambers. Professor mentioned that the nature cannot cope with our products. Rector Bujalski referred to numbers. Let me say that there are 5,300 minerals in nature, while man has generated 180,000 different artificial compounds. So we actually pretty well supplement the composition of the Earth to a level of magnitude of size. Professor Keane, what about the representation of non-humans? You actually deal with democracy crisis primarily. This thought of representing someone else than humans, can it bring us closer in democracy to solve the current crisis?
Yes. So I cannot, before saying a few things about representation, I want to say two things about the discussion so far. One is that there is one area in which the Anthropocene concept applies, and it's the nuclear question. I mean, there is a big Japanese discussion that is going on about this being the most important driver, ultimately, of the destruction of the biosphere in which we dwell. I mean, there were more than 500 explosions between 1945 and 1963. 6 of them happened actually just a couple of 100 kilometers from where I was born. And my father died of cancers from one of these or several of these bombs. This is one thing. The other point I think is very important in the Anthropocene, and then I get to representation, is we should be a bit more humble about the earth sciences. If you read someone like David Archer, he teaches us that actually there are carbon cycles, they're immensely complicated. And there are dynamics like the Milankovitch cycle, in which, we're forced to think about our planet as circling but wobbling. And he points out that, David Archer, that 10,000 years ago, the Earth was much warmer than now. And then there was an ice age. What we are doing probably is postponing an ice age. So more humility, I think, is needed when we talk about Anthropocene and paying attention to one of the killer dynamics, which is nuclear. On representation, well, in the history of democracy, the ancient Greek assemblies did not even have a word for representation. And the marriage of the words representatio and demokratia happened only in the last years of the 18th century, where the notion of representative or electoral democracy was born. Principally in democracy, that meant that democracy was about self-government of people through their chosen representatives, through periodic elections and having parliaments and so on. We know that. It never happened before in the history of democracy what is going on now, which is that there is not only a big discussion about the extension of, as you say, Michał, the extension of the word representative and representation to our relationship with the biomes in which we dwell. But there are lots of practical innovations that never happened before in the history of democracy. And this, if we have any hope for ourselves on this planet, it seems to me that this is an area where social scientists and political activists can join together to look at, to catalog and to look at the range of representation experiments. That is, where we humans humbly, in a relational way, in a fiduciary way, use the language of representation to include not only rivers and forests and species, but actually to think about the whole biosphere. This is, for example, the Gaia discussion that Latour was very active in promoting. What are these practical experiments? Well, Earthwatch summits, coral reef monitoring networks, of course, Aarhus Convention, regional and global agreements. These are all instances of the extension and redefinition of democracy. So democracy comes to mean, this is, I think, one of the revolutionary effects of this period, a paradigm shift, if you like. Democracy comes to mean the self-government of peoples living on patches of the earth, choosing their representatives, but also including the biomes in which they dwell, where there is a defense of those biomes against human destruction. Bruno Latour liked to quote the great slogan of the Zadists. We are not defending nature, we are nature defending ourselves against humans. Well, this spirit is very much, I think, part of this shift, this attempt to redefine democracy so that it is no longer a homocentric idea. And among the most interesting, I finish with this, examples, practical examples, and I have written about this most recently in The Shortest History of Democracy, which is not in Polish yet. I call it biodemocracy. If you look at the center of the continent in which I live, there is a very large rock. It's a very important spiritual place for indigenous peoples. In the last 2.5 decades, there is a form of self-government that has been born in this area to protect this rock called Uluru. And when you look at it, when you look at how power is exercised and the meaning of the election of representatives to protect this large patch of the continent, you see that it defies every textbook understanding of democracy. What goes on? Well, periodically there are elections to a governing committee of humans. They are overwhelmingly black. How do they think about their role as governors of this patch of the earth? They do not think that they are sovereign people who are entitled to do anything. What they are doing is protecting the origins of the earth, Dreamtime it's called, protecting the traditions that are told to them by their ancestors, protecting this area, a very sacred area, for the future. Well, this is an example of representatia in action. And there are, of course, New Zealand instances. There are some West Pacific examples. But there are growing numbers of these kinds of innovations, to repeat, that never happened before in the history of democracy. The truth, if I can put it like this, of representation and its redefinition is that it reminds us, the Uluru experiment reminds us that representation is not identification. That is, to put it more simply, we are representing animals. We are talking now about the biomes in which we dwell. We use language, we name things. In the broader sense, that is what, we can have a long philosophical discussion about it, but that is what representation does. It's a process of joy, of creating a relationship with people and objects, biomes, where they are named and they are drawn into a relationship with us. And this generates a kind of respect, a kind of need for trust, a need to protect objects, animals, and so on. Representation is what Edmund Burke, the Anglo-Irish politician and great political writer, called virtual representation. Yes, nature cannot speak, but it can and is being represented through all of these political experiments that are going on. And if there is any hope for we humans on this planet, it is, I think, the defense of these experiments and their proliferation, their multiplication, wherever it can be done.
Pani profesor?
Tak,
Madam Professor, a philosopher needs to ask a question. Why? Why should we be interested in this? We started with a problem. We have altered the earth. We've been changing the earth so that it is dangerous to us, to our existence. But we are interested in ourselves. Kind of our perspective is a self-care perspective. And Professor was mentioning silent minorities. We need to say that this group of people, group of persons, in philosophy, a person is a moral subject of moral value. This expands For Aristotle, it was neither a woman nor a slave that were a moral subject. Until 19th century, a peasant was not one. Now, all Homo sapiens belong to this milieu, and we are wondering how to introduce animals different from people. Therefore, my friends, ecologists, philosophers, lawyers from New York who have these ideas, they have processes of liberation of elephants and chimpanzees based on the idea that a chimpanzee or an elephant might be the subject of law, a legal person. But why? What is the worth in us, in other animals, in a river, a piece of rock, or a mountain, so that we need to care about it? And the first response is return to ourselves. We take care of that. We think about rivers and other things so that we, as the species, are able to survive. Other animals, the river, the rock, is there anything valuable as such? Not because of our own good, because this is anthropocentrism that we have that has brought so many problems. But we look for an independent value independent of us, of our life, our survival. And it's not that easy, I need to tell you. When I ask my students at the biology department, why should we have invested so much money to save panda bear, that hardly do they know the answer. It's a sweet bear when you watch films, and there are reels on the internet that feature panda bear. Excuse me for chopping in order to improve the image of the People's Republic of China. This is why we did all the saving, panda diplomacy thing. I'm not delving into this problem, but what's wrong with some species dying out? There might be nothing wrong. Like, for example, dinosaurs are extinct now. You might say that the world should be diversified, but why should it be diversified? These questions pertain to this basic question. Would the world cope better without us? It's a wrong question, because we are the ones to judge it. If we are not here, we are unable to judge it. I know how it sounds. It's very anthropocentric, I'd say. But do we have any other perspective? Do we have the basis to think some other way? And the last thing that I think as a philosopher is finding the value. And this value is pivoted on the fact that we feel that we are beings, and other animals are also beings that can sense and feel. Responding to Professor, today's pace of heating, according to NASA, it's not my opinion, but this is NASA publication, 20 times faster compared to the heating period after the last ice period. But for human impact, it would be the temperature lowering period rather than temperature increase period. So our impact is really visible and apparent. Returning to the previous question, yeah. We are a part of nature. It's important to comprehend it. Each of us are composed of thousands of beings, bacteria, fungi. We wouldn't have been here but for them. And the first law of ecology says that everything is connected with everything else. We can speak about ourselves and our relations with nature, geosphere, everything. whatever is happening on Earth. This crossword, this puzzle has been organized for millions of years. And we are not a coincidence. We have an informed impact of what is happening on Earth. And I do realize that we are a part of nature, that we're composed of other beings. Many people realize it. But this is not the discussion that is easy to understand by millions. The awareness, the depth, comprehension, proximity to nature is wonderful when we look at indigenous people. I'd like all people to live this way, but we will not live this way. We are in the era of capital, of ownership. We won't be able to teach people to be sensitive to nature again, to connect the dots. So, it is more important, well, I don't want to have it this way, but I try to exercise pragmatic attitude. We need to make people aware how very much dependent we are on what nature has streamlined itself, how much we owe to this. There are ecosystem services. We can value a tree, that we can appraise, not tell you what's the worth of the tree. Oxygen generation, cooling of the building, decreasing energy amount translates into measurable benefits for us. And man must be in the center of this equation. We can save the nature, but without saving the nature, we are doomed to die. This is how I see saving the planet. If bringing us closer to the planet was enough, we would have been there, but we have been detached from the nature too much. We need to find people where they are. Most people are not in the place, and they will never reach this deep comprehension. It does not mean that they want to see the destruction of everything of the planet. They do not know the interdependencies. They don't know the planet, what it is. They do not want to see the world collapse, but you need to translate them in the language of measurable benefits that people know, because what is harmful to nature is harmful to all of us here and now. I can see that we are running out of time. 3 points about 3 things. One thing, without expanding, we need to start understanding animals. One of the most beautiful sentences I've ever read in literature, a hero said, "I'd like to be the man my dog believes me to be." We could speak about it at length. What is happening in a beehive, for example, or in ant family is pretty complex. I'm not an expert on biology. And the second thing, James Membridge, American political scientist, 2003, and there is a suggestion. Surrogate representation is what is she offering between the represented subject and the representative. There needs to be no connection. It was about voting, as a matter of fact. In United Kingdom, if somebody was born in this conservative constituency, they may never see the representation of their own. In Nottingham or somewhere else, there is somebody who represents the left wing. There is no direction, no delegation. And the same mechanism should be taken into consideration when we think how to represent animals. All humanity is represented. Do they have rights? No, like children below the age of 18. How to shorten this period? 17-year-old man, why the perception of the world is inferior to somebody who is septuagenarian, but the perception of life is weaker. And the last thing that I want to touch upon, Anthropocene, pretty radical. I'm getting pretty radical. This debate is going to clash with monotheistic religions. Family, 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 of course, Polish family, man, 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 human. Or somebody's going to say, we've got a wise priest who sometimes speaks about animals. But normally, animals are not mentioned. It's not about our priests, these lazy ones, but it applies to many religions. And Eastern religions have got a different notion, perception of women and animals. They protected trees 50 years ago, being in danger of being attacked by the police. This is part of history, but we never reacted before. Ladies and gentlemen, 7 minutes left before I request our guests to give us a wrap-up and to tell us where we take hope from. Is there any question? You made it. We don't have many microphones. I'll be using mine. I'm really happy. Edyta Pietrzak, Łódź University of Technology. Thank you very much for this debate. Long-awaited debate. It's been worth it. First question to Professor Keane. We've got 6 minutes, 35 seconds, so be brief. Because you were speaking about redefinition of democracy and the chances given by Anthropocene. So what is your concept of a global civic society in the context of Anthropocene? What is your perception? Because this is the idea. And the second thing to Madam Professor Radek, post-anthropocentric twist. What do you think, what Karen Barrett thinks, a new materialism in the context of new materialism? What is the perception of Anthropocene? And to Professor Markowski, civic potential that is inclusive and exclusive for non-human beings. What is your perception of this? Because these are interesting things. So we've got ready questions. And thank you, Szymon. No questions to you, you've said everything. So let's start with Professor... No. Let's start from the end. 1 minute for each of you. Professor Markowski first. Again, I'm surprised with this Polish saying, homo homini lupus est. So if we learn about wolf packs, a wolf to a wolf is more human than human to human. It's a great task for zoologists and biologists. I'm holding a book in my hand, How to Understand Animals. People try. It will not be civic attitude like ours, but some things can be publicized. Cats understand us, but ignore what we say to us. Yeah, for certain. Madam Professor? speaking about the possibilities of offering a solution, my position is we should be looking for things that we know, that we can speak about. We can speak through analogy. We can learn about animals through analogy. We are limited by the language. Reference to biology and biological processes is the only possibility. We need to understand that the animal is like us. They are similar in their feelings, in their suffering. We should streamline the world that single animals, not species, single animals shouldn't suffer or suffer the least and take care of their well-being. So these are the notions that I use. Professor John Keane?
Yeah, 100 years ago, when I was young, I made the case, which I learned from this part of Europe, to build the concept, the whole idea, the language, the feelings of civil society into the very idea of democracy. And I still hold to that position, and your question about global civil society is extremely important. What we're witnessing, it never happened before in the history of democracy. I am not a naive optimist, but what we're witnessing is the growth of cross-border associations and networks and organizations that are committed to stopping this degradation of the planet on which we dwell. Green parties are one example. You know, I come from a country that claims to have had the first Green Party in the world. You don't have one in Poland, and actually I have to say that the discussions tonight reflects that. If you have a Green Party that stirs up trouble, it changes the whole discourse.
There are 3 members of parliament.
We have an upper house which is controlled by the Greens. You know that. So it's this cross-border cooperation, typically non-violent, that involves a proliferation of a whole set of new institutions. And there are 2 examples I would give of this. One, we didn't discuss it tonight, is the importance of energy regimes. You know, if you look at the history of democracy, the ancient Greek assemblies were basically forms of democracy where male muscle power was the prime source of energy. They rode the warships and so on. Interestingly, representative democracy, born at the end of the 18th century, it almost died by World War II, was a revolution in a reimagining of democracy that happened simultaneously with a shift to carbon energy regime. And I would say that this era, I call it monitory democracy, where democracy means free and fair elections, but something more, accountability of power wherever it is exercised, is the struggles that are going on are to do with whether there can be a shift to post-carbon energy regimes. This is a huge topic in Europe, it's a huge global topic, and there's a lot of cooperation at civil society level among corporations, investors, citizens, activists, and so on. One last example, we didn't mention the clock. We didn't mention COVID-19. It is an allegory. I hope we will remember. It's not finished. It is an allegory of what happens when humans wreck biomes and the biomes take their revenge on humans. This is not the last pestilence. There will be more of them. And I would say at the level of civil society, there is a sharing among virologists, citizens, organizations to prevent the next one. The best person I would recommend you read and listen to is Petr Piot, I think, in Europe, is the one who warns that we humans should also pay attention to the ways in which the Earth takes revenge on us. This is a warning to those who want to speak of the Anthropocene. Extreme weather events, zoonotic viruses and pestilences are not finished.
Pięknie dziękuję.
Thank you very much indeed, Szymon Bujalski, John Keane, Radosław Markowski. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Michał Sutowski. These were Anthropocene challenges and reaction. The last panel of today at this session. Thank you very much.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise.
Atlas Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the U.S. We have about 159 partners in the United States right now, and the bulk of our partners are outside, nearly 500 in total.
Atlas Network, it connects people from all over the world, defending the idea of human dignity, defending human rights and personal liberties.
Atlas Network is focusing on, I think, the most important and moral cause in the entire world.
We partner with local innovators, local leaders who understand conditions on the ground in communities facing real challenges. We look at the people from the worldwide freedom movement that are passionate, are ready to make a difference, understand local conditions, and we invest in them.
At Atlas Network, we unleash individual ingenuity to enrich humanity.
The United States does not have a lock on the idea of freedom and liberty. Those ideas are beyond borders.
One of the main goals of Atlas Network is to eradicate poverty around the world, and we do that by investing millions of dollars in our partners' work every year.
Historically, wealthy nations around the world have tried to help low-income countries develop. The way we've been doing it traditionally has not really been working. So there's a movement to do development differently, and that means we need to step back as outsiders and rethink the role that we're playing in helping people in low-income countries achieve their dreams.
We want to make the world a better place. We want to make the world a freer world.
All of us want to leave a legacy and be part of something big to make a better world. This is exactly the work of Atlas Network.
With our growing number of hundreds of successful partners, we're stronger than ever.
Changing the world
Changing the world
Changing the world
starts together
with us.